I'm 62 years old and for most of my life I believed in keeping things simple. I loved my husband, raised our 2 kids, worked part-time at the local library, and spent quiet evenings tending to my rose bushes or curling up with a good book. I never chased excitement, never strayed far from routine. I thought that was enough. But last fall something changed. I never thought something like this could happen to me. Please don't make the same mistake I did. It had rained that day, not a downpour, just that light, steady drizzle that turns everything gray and makes you feel like the world's gone quiet. I remember how the windshield wipers made a soft rhythm as the car moved down the road, back and forth, back and forth. We had just left a quarterly meeting at the Marriott Conference Center, one of those long corporate things with dry chicken lunches and lukewarm coffee. My husband, Greg, couldn't make it. He had a dental appointment he couldn't reschedule. So his boss offered to drive me home, since we lived only a few blocks apart. Are you sure? I had asked. Of course, he said, smiling gently. It's on my way, and I could use the company. His name was Mark Delan, early 60s, maybe a couple of years older than me. Tall, with silver hair that always seemed perfectly in place. There was something calm about him, something collected, the kind of man who speaks softly and still manages to command a room. I'd known him for years through Greg. They worked together for nearly 2 decades, and every time I saw Mark he was polite, respectful, almost distant. We'd spoken only in passing, the kind of conversations that filled the space between polite laughter and conference dinners. But that afternoon felt different. The car smelled like cedar and mint, and the leather seats were warm. We didn't say much at first, just the usual small talk, how tired we were of meetings, how dreary the weather had been, how fast the year was flying by. Then a pause. Not awkward. Just quiet. Comfortable, almost. You know, he said, glancing sideways at me, you have a peaceful way about you. I smiled, not quite knowing what to say. I guess I've always tried to be that way. Doesn't always work. He chuckled, eyes back on the road. No one's peaceful all the time. The rain tapped gently against the windows as we drove through the sleepy suburbs. We passed the park where I used to take the kids when they were small. I stared out the window, memories tying at the edges of my thoughts. You ever think about what comes next? He asked. That caught me off guard. Next in life, he said, after the kids grow up, after the job's not enough anymore, after the house feels too quiet. I hesitated. Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on it. I've always been someone who looks at what's right in front of me. He nodded slowly. I used to think like that too. The tone of his voice changed then, just a little. Softer, a little sadder. I turned to look at him. His eyes stayed on the road, but there was something in his face. Not sorrow exactly, but weight. A tiredness that hadn't been there before. I lost Claire 3 years ago, he said. I felt a knot form in my chest. I'm so sorry. Greg told me, but we never talked about it. He nodded. It's all right. It's just, when someone's been part of your rhythm for so long, it's like the whole song feels off after they're gone. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I just let the silence sit between us for a moment. Sometimes silence is kinder than words. We pulled up to a red light and he finally looked at me, really looked at me. Not the way a man looks at his friend's wife. Not the way a boss looks at a colleague's spouse. There was something deeper. Curious. Searching. I envy Greg, he said, voice low. My breath caught. Why? Because he still has you. His words weren't crude or flirtatious. They were sincere. Too sincere. I tried to speak but the light turned green and we started moving again. The words caught in my throat. He didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. Neither did I. When we pulled into my driveway, the rain had stopped. There was just the sound of water dripping from the branches overhead. I reached for the door handle, trying to think of something, anything that would make this moment feel less strange, less charged. But then he said, "Would you mind if I ask you something honest?" I turned back toward him, slowly. "I suppose that depends. Do you ever feel invisible?" That question sat in the air like a held breath. My fingers let go of the door handle. I could have lied. I could have laughed and brushed it off. But I didn't. I just looked at him and I nodded. He reached out, not to touch me, but to offer his hand, palm up, between us like a quiet invitation. I didn't take it. Not then. But I didn't walk away either. I didn't sleep well that night. Greg was already snoring softly beside me, his arm draped across his chest like it always was. Everything was exactly as it had been for years. Same house. Same routine. Same man. But I couldn't quiet my mind. Mark's question echoed in my head, "Do you ever feel invisible?" I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, watching faint shadows from the window dance across the plaster. I wasn't angry. I wasn't flattered either. What I felt was far more complicated. A slow unraveling of something I hadn't realized was knotted inside me. It wasn't about attraction. It wasn't even about Mark. It was about being seen, truly seen. Not as a wife or a mother or a neighbor who remembers to water her lawn. But as a woman. A whole person. And it had been so long since anyone had looked at me that way. The next morning I went about my routine. Coffee, toast, feeding the cat, folding Greg's shirts from the dryer. But everything felt slightly off, like the furniture had been rearranged just enough that I kept bumping into the edges. Around noon my phone buzzed. A text. "Mark Delaney. Hope I didn't make you uncomfortable yesterday." That wasn't my intention. I stared at it for a long time before replying. "You didn't. I just wasn't expecting it." He responded almost immediately. "Me neither." That was all. Just 2 words. But somehow they carried more weight than I wanted them to. We didn't talk again for a few days. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. A strange moment in a car that would slowly fade into memory. But it didn't. If anything, it lingered. Then the following week Greg mentioned that Mark had invited a few people over for a small dinner. "You're welcome to come too," he added casually, buttering his toast. I kept my face neutral. "Sounds nice." "He's been different lately," Greg said. "Since Claire passed. Think he's trying to reconnect with people." I nodded, sipping my coffee. I didn't say anything else. The dinner was the next Saturday. Casual. Nothing fancy. A few couples from the office, some light jazz playing in the background. Mark's house was tasteful, lots of bookshelves, framed records on the wall, soft lighting. When I arrived with Greg, Mark greeted us both at the door. He was wearing a navy sweater over a white button-down, sleeves pushed up to his forearms. His expression didn't change when he saw me, but his eyes lingered for just a moment longer than necessary. The evening passed in a blur of conversation and laughter. I made small talk with Greg's coworkers, complimented the wine, helped in the kitchen. Everything was perfectly ordinary. But I could feel him watching me subtly from across the room. Not in a predatory way. More like he was waiting for something. Later, after dessert, I stepped out onto the back deck. The evening air was cool, and the garden lights cast soft glows across the hedges. I leaned on the railing, breathing in the scent of wet leaves. "Thought I might find you out here," Mark said behind me. I didn't turn around. Needed some air. He stepped beside me, leaving a respectful space between us. "You look distracted," he said. I laughed quietly. That's one word for it. I meant what I said, you know. About you having a peaceful way. But I also see something else. I looked at him now, frowning slightly. What do you mean? I see someone who carries a lot and doesn't let anyone see it. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The truth is there were parts of me I had tucked away for so long. Dreams. Wants. Regrets. I had wrapped them in silence and practicality, convinced myself they no longer mattered. But in that moment, with Mark standing beside me under the soft outdoor lights, I felt them stirring. He turned toward me, gently. You deserve more than invisibility. Those words shouldn't have meant anything. I had a good life, a stable marriage, loving children. But I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, sudden and uninvited. I should go inside, I whispered. He didn't stop me. He didn't touch me. He just nodded. But before I stepped back through the sliding glass door, I heard him say, so softly I almost missed it, you don't have to disappear just because you're loved. And that was the moment the ground shifted under my feet. Quietly. Permanently. I spent the next week moving through my life like I was in a fog. Greg noticed I was quieter than usual, but he chalked it up to a cold or maybe hormones. We'd been married long enough that we could read each other's moods, but not always the reasons behind them. And I didn't offer any. I couldn't stop thinking about what Mark had said, you don't have to disappear just because you're loved. That sentence stayed with me. Followed me while I folded laundry. Whispered in my ear while I watered the garden. Pressed itself into my thoughts when I lay awake at night. I wasn't planning anything. I wasn't looking for trouble. But something inside me had been disturbed. Not broken. Not ruined. Just unsettled. And maybe it had been too settled for too long. Midweek I went to the grocery store, and as I stood in the produce aisle debating between two brands of grapes, I heard a familiar voice. Try the red ones. Less tart. I turned. Mark was standing a few feet away, holding a basket and a bag of apples. We both smiled, a little awkward. Well, I said, I didn't expect to see you here. I come on Wednesdays. Quieter. I hate fighting over parking spots. I laughed. Smart. There was a moment of silence between us again, but this time it felt more charged. More conscious. It wasn't just two acquaintances making small talk. He shifted slightly, his voice lowering. Would you want to grab a coffee? Just talk. My pulse quickened. Now? He shrugged. Or whenever. No pressure. Just a conversation. I should have said no. I knew that. But I didn't. We ended up at a small cafe near the park, one of those cozy places with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus. We sat by the window. Mark ordered black coffee, I ordered tea, and for a while we just talked. Not about Greg. Not about the office. Just life. He told me about how lonely the house had felt after Claire died, how he would wake up and forget for a moment she wasn't there, only to feel the weight of her absence hit him all over again. I listened. Not as Greg's wife. Not as a neighbor. Just as a woman sitting across from a man who was being honest. When it was my turn to speak, I surprised myself with what came out. I don't think I've ever let myself want anything that didn't make sense, I said. He looked at me gently. That sounds exhausting. It is, I whispered. We sat in silence for a while, watching the rain begin again outside the window. People passed by with umbrellas, heads down, lost in their own lives. Then softly he said, would you let me see you again? Just for coffee. Nothing more. I met his eyes. They weren't demanding or expectant. Just waiting. I could feel my heart beating in my throat. Okay, I said. Just coffee. But we both knew it wouldn't stay just coffee. Not because of some reckless desire. Not because we wanted to hurt anyone. But because something had begun. A slow, subtle pull between two people who had spent too long pretending they were whole. When I got home, Greg was in the garage, fixing the leaky garden hose. He waved at me through the open door, smiling like everything was fine. And it was. On the surface. I made dinner. We watched the news. I kissed him goodnight. But lying in bed that night, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was no longer just waiting for Mark to reach out again. I was hoping he would. It was a Thursday afternoon when Mark texted again. Mark Delaney. Are you free tomorrow morning? I know a quiet place by the lake. Good coffee. No pressure. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. The week had passed slowly. Too slowly. Every hour felt like a question I couldn't answer. And now here it was, the answer asking for me. I typed yes and hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The next morning I told Greg I was going to the farmer's market. He didn't question it. He was heading into the city for a team meeting, already half distracted by a conference call. I watched him pull out of the driveway, waving from the porch, the familiar ache of routine wrapping around me like a shawl. Then I got in my car and drove in the opposite direction. The cafe was tucked away near the lake, small, quiet, nearly empty on a Friday morning. Mark was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table by the window. He looked up as I walked in and something in his face softened. No smile. Just stillness. Recognition. I sat down across from him. For a while we didn't speak. We just sipped our drinks and listened to the sounds around us, the gentle clink of cups, the occasional gust of wind against the glass. Then he said, "Thank you for coming." I nodded, unsure of what to say. My eyes didn't leave his. We talked about everything and nothing. About the feeling of time slipping away. About growing older and realizing that the deepest parts of ourselves still want to be seen. Still want to be touched. If only by understanding. He didn't reach for my hand. I didn't lean across the table. But something passed between us that morning, something undeniable. When we left, he walked me to my car. I opened the door, placing my bag inside. But I didn't get in yet. I just stood there, the early sun glinting off the lake behind him, the wind pulling at the edges of his jacket. He looked at me carefully. "Tell me what you're thinking." I hesitated, then spoke softly. "I think I've spent most of my life doing what's expected, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of my marriage, of raising good children, of keeping a good home. But somewhere along the way I stopped asking myself what I wanted. And now here I am, talking to someone who saw that before I did." He stepped just a little closer, but still didn't touch me. "I've never wanted to hurt Greg," I said. "I know," he replied. "Neither do I. But I also can't pretend that this didn't matter." "No," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "It mattered." The wind carried the silence between us again. Then I said something I hadn't expected to say, not even to myself. "I need to go home. I need to figure out who I am again. And what I'm willing to lose to feel like her." He nodded, not with disappointment, but with something like respect. I got into my car, shut the door, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, watching me go. Not chasing. Not calling out. Just letting me go. That evening I sat with Greg on the back porch. The air was warm, and the sky glowed with the soft colors of sunset. He was talking about the new intern at work, something about her not understanding the filing system, but I wasn't really listening. Eventually I turned to him. Greg, I said gently. He looked at me, surprised by the seriousness in my tone. Do you think I've changed? He furrowed his brow. Changed how? Since the kids moved out. Since we got older. Since life got quieter. He took a long breath, then said, maybe. But so have I. We all do, don't we? I nodded. Then I reached for his hand. Would you notice, I asked, if I disappeared a little? His face shifted just slightly. Enough. He squeezed my hand. I'd notice. For the first time in a long time, I felt something unspoken pass between us. Maybe it was the beginning of a reckoning. Maybe not. But it was real. That night I didn't dream about Mark. I didn't think about coffee shops or lakefront silences. I thought about the woman I used to be, and the one I still had time to become.